Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging headfirst into a topic that, well, it touches many of us, whether we've realized it or not: introversion. We've pulled together a really rich collection of sources for this deep dive, everything from rigorous psychological studies and deep historical analyses to practical advice columns and, candid personal reflections.
Yeah, and our mission today is to truly unpack what it means to be an introvert. We want to get beyond those common stereotypes, reveal the unique strengths, the often overlooked challenges, and the rich inner world that defines this fundamental personality trait. You might just discover some surprising facts about yourself or maybe your colleagues, even your own children, and why you or they operate the way you do.
Exactly. Think of this as your shortcut, maybe, to understanding why some people recharge in quiet solitude, while others genuinely seem to thrive in the vibrant spotlight. We'll explore how introversion isn't just a simple preference. It's actually a deep-seated aspect of who we are, with roots in our biology and a fascinating history that shaped how society views it. So what does this all mean for you? Let's unpack this. Okay, let's start with a really clear definition, maybe, because when we talked about introversion, it's just so often misunderstood. What are we truly discussing here?
Well, what's fascinating here is how often introversion gets confused with social anxiety. They're really quite different. Introversion is, at its core, a personality trait. It's characterized by a preference for less external stimulation and often solitary activities, and really a core need to recharge your energy when you're alone.
Okay, so needing that alone time.
Right. Social anxiety, though, that's an intense fear of social situations, usually driven by a fear of judgment or embarrassment. It's actually a diagnosable mental health condition, not just, a personality disposition.
That's a really crucial distinction. So it reframes the entire concept. It's not about being shy or afraid of people necessarily,
Not necessarily, no.
but about how you game and spend your energy.
Precisely. Think of it like this. Introverts often recharge when they're alone. They seem to need more time to process and analyze stimuli before responding. Now, while they absolutely enjoy people and connection, they tend to prefer smaller groups and maybe deeper connections.
Makes sense.
Extroverts, on the other hand, they gain energy from external interaction and engagement. They get energized by being out there.
Right, they feed off that energy. And what about those of us who feel like, well, maybe we don't fit neatly into either box? Is there a middle ground?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
For some individuals, we often call them ambiverts. They fall more towards the center of that spectrum. They hold characteristics of both.
So a mix.
Kind of a mix, yeah. And it's also true that people can seem more introverted in certain areas of their lives and, more extroverted in others. And while research suggests personality tends to get pretty stable after age 30, partly because our social environments stabilize, these tendencies can still evolve over time, too. It's not completely fixed.
That's fascinating. So there's stability, but also some adaptability. Speaking of sensitivities, what about this idea of highly sensitive people, or HSPs? How does that connect, or maybe not connect, with introversion?
That's a really important clarification because while many introverts are also HSPs, the concepts themselves are distinct. Research suggests about 15–20% of the population are HSPs. It means they have nervous systems that are, let's say, highly attuned to stimuli. Yeah, they process information very deeply, noticing levels of stimulation that others might just miss entirely. But an HSP can be either introverted or extroverted.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So a sensitive extrovert, for instance, would still crave that external engagement. But because they process everything so deeply, they'd also need significant downtime to recharge, much like an introvert would.
Ah, okay. So it's less about where you get your energy, maybe, and more about the intensity of how you experience the world.
Exactly. It's about the depth of processing.
Okay, here's where I found things get really interesting in the research. This concept of an extrovert ideal, especially in Western culture. Can you unpack what that is, and maybe where did it even come from?
Yeah, the extrovert ideal, it's basically this societal preference for, outgoing, bold, highly entertaining personalities. The person who's always on. Historically, if you look back to the early 20th century, there was this really significant cultural shift.
A shift from what?
We moved from what historians call a culture of character, which valued things like seriousness, discipline, private integrity, Abraham Lincoln, maybe, known for quiet integrity.
Right, inner qualities.
Exactly. We shifted to a culture of personality, where public perception, charm, and performance suddenly became paramount. And advertising really reinforced this, big time. It started portraying consumers almost as performers, constantly under the hostile glare of the public spotlight, as one source put it.
Wow, so talking quickly and loudly suddenly became like a marker for intelligence,
Pretty much, yeah. Talkative people are often rated as smarter, better looking, more interesting.
even if there's no link.
Even though study after study shows there's just no correlation between how much you talk and how good your ideas actually are. And the very word introvert, it became kind of stigmatized. One informal study even found he was often associated with negative physical descriptions, which is just wild.
That creates real pressure, doesn't it? For introverts to try and fit in, maybe feel like they're somehow broken.
Absolutely. It makes them feel broken or that something's wrong with them for not being naturally outgoing.
Is this mainly a Western thing, or do we see this extrovert ideal everywhere?
That's a great question. Robert McCrae's research, looking at personality traits across the globe, suggests a pretty clear pattern. Asia, for example, tends to be more introverted culturally, while Europe and the United States lean more extroverted.
And that causes friction sometimes.
It can lead to cultural clashes,
Yeah.
For example, in classrooms. And Asian students' deference to the teacher, which is respectful in their culture, might be misinterpreted by a Western teacher as, like, unwillingness to participate.
When really it's just a different communication style.
Exactly. Different norms.
So, if the cultural landscape often feels like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole for introverts, that leads us to the big question, is this just culture? Or is there something deeper, maybe biological, going on? What does the science say about actual brain differences?
Right. That's the critical question. And yes, the research definitely indicates that introversion-extroversion is related to real, measurable differences in brain function. Introverts tend to show more blood flow in areas like the frontal lobes and the anterior thalamus.
Which are involved in?
Internal processing. Things like planning, problem solving, reflecting. They're doing a lot in their heads. Extroverts, meanwhile, show more blood flow in areas linked to sensory and emotional experience. The anterior cingulate gyrus, temporal lobes, posterior thalamus, more tuned in to the outside world.
So introverts are quite literally more in their heads, processing things internally first.
In a very real sense, yes. And there's more. Introversion is also positively correlated with greater gray matter volume in specific areas like the right prefrontal cortex.
The brain's control center.
Kind of, yeah.
Mhm.
Involved in complex thought, decision-making, and also more total white matter volume. The brain's wiring, essentially.
Mm.
Extroversion, on the other hand, has been linked to a higher sensitivity in the mesolimbic dopamine system.
The reward system.
Exactly, that reward circuit. It helps explain why extroverts often report higher levels of positive affect. They get a bigger buzz from potentially rewarding external stuff.
That's incredibly insightful. So how do these biological differences play out in how people react to, say, new experiences or even stress?
Well, this brings up reactivity. High reactive temperaments, which often correlate with introversion, individuals are just more sensitive to various kinds of stimulation. That could be anything from a strong cup of coffee to a loud noise or, a big networking event.
Overwhelming.
Potentially, yes. Their amygdala, the brain's fear or threat center, even shows more sensitivity to unfamiliar faces in studies. But here's the hopeful part. The frontal cortex, our executive function hub, can actually step in and increase its activity to soothe those unwarranted fears.
So it can manage it.
We can. It shows that while our genetic predispositions are there, we absolutely can stretch our comfort zones. We're not completely fixed by our biology.
This reminds me so much of that orchid and dandelion hypothesis I read about. Can you explain that for us?
Yes, that's a fantastic analogy. It suggests some kids are like dandelions, hardy, they can thrive pretty much anywhere.
Resilient.
Very resilient. Others, including many high reactive types, are more like orchids. They might wilt more easily under stress or difficult conditions. But under the right, supportive, nurturing conditions, they can grow incredibly strong and magnificent.
So it's not about being weaker, but more sensitive to the environment.
Precisely. Orchid children seem to be more strongly affected by all experiences, both the negative and the positive. The environment matters more, for better or worse.
So, okay, there's clearly a strong genetic component, a biological underpinning, but the environment plays an absolutely crucial role, too. It's that classic nature-nurture interaction.
Absolutely. It's never just one or the other. Personality traits have genetic influences, for sure, but environmental factors, especially those unique life experiences that shape each of us differently, play a really significant role. The whole picture is this complex interplay between genes and environment that, honestly, scientists are still working hard to fully map out.
Okay, so despite this extrovert ideal we talked about, our sources really emphasize that introverts have unique strengths. often undervalued strengths. What are some of these superpowers, as some might call them?
Well, for one, introverts are often excellent listeners. And that is such a fundamental, crucial communication skill, right? Often overlooked.
Definitely.
They tend to be analytical, thoughtful observers. They often prefer to reflect and sort of clarify things internally before they speak out loud. And this allows for more deliberate, well-considered contributions. They often add depth and perspective that maybe gets missed in faster-paced discussions. Plus, they're often highly introspective, which can lead to a really deep understanding of their own strengths, weaknesses, goals.
That self-awareness. I've also heard that introverts can be particularly good at creative work. Is there truth to that, especially when everything seems to push for constant collaboration these days?
There seems to be, yeah. Solitude can be a really powerful catalyst for innovation. You think of people like Steve Wozniak, the Apple co-founder.
Right, worked alone on the Apple.
Exactly. He intentionally worked alone and even advises aspiring creatives to do the same. He famously said something like, "Nothing really revolutionary has been invented by committee." And research, going back like 40 years, consistently shows that individuals working alone often generate more ideas and often higher quality ideas than traditional brainstorming groups do.
That really challenges the whole open plan office mandatory brainstorming trend, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
It suggests maybe we need more balance. While teams are important, providing flexible spaces that include options for quiet, focused work like Pixar and Microsoft are known for.
Yeah, offering both.
That can benefit everyone, introverts and extroverts alike, by giving people space for that deep work.
Yeah.
And interestingly, introverts often excel in academic settings too. They might find them less boring than extroverts sometimes do. And they're often strongly associated with intelligence and even giftedness.
Okay, what about leadership? Can introverts be effective leaders? Because so much emphasis seems to be on being charismatic, outgoing.
Right, the charismatic leader trope.
Right.
But our sources really challenge this assumption head on. While extroversion is often identified as a predictor for emerging as a leader, it's not necessarily the best predictor for performance. Think about Jim Collins's famous level 5 leaders.
From good to great.
That's the one. They led the best performing companies, and they were known for humility combined with intense professional will. Often quite quiet, actually. Or historical figures like Rosa Parks described as having quiet strength. Even Moses, described in the Bible as very meek, not a great speaker. Powerful leaders, but not necessarily limelight seekers.
That's a great point.
And research actually suggests something interesting. Extroverted leaders might be better when employees are passive, needing that outward motivation. But introverted leaders, they seem to be more effective when their employees are proactive and self-starters. They give them space.
So it's about leveraging their natural style, not forcing something else.
Exactly. It's about fit.
And introverts often lean towards writing, right? They can communicate very effectively from a distance, carefully crafting their thoughts. They tend to strive for quality. They're rarely careless, often quite tuned in to other people's experiences. These are hugely valuable qualities, especially when their ideas are actually heard and respected.
Okay, so they have all these strengths. But let's be real. Navigating a world that often feels geared towards extroverts must present some unique challenges. What stands out to you as the biggest hurdles for introverts?
I think a major one is often communication style, particularly with extroverts who, prefer to talk things through right then and there.
Thinking out loud.
Exactly. Whereas introverts often want to process internally first. They need that time to think before they speak. And this mismatch can lead to misunderstandings, right? Or the introvert might seem withdrawn during a conflict when they're really just processing. Small talk can also be a genuine struggle. They often prefer deeper, more meaningful conversations over superficial chit-chat.
Which can make networking events tough. Definitely challenging, yeah.
So what are some practical, really actionable strategies introverts can use? How can they adapt and even thrive in workplaces or social settings that maybe don't naturally play to their strengths?
Yeah, practical strategies are key. Things like consciously learning from others who navigate similar situations well, engaging on topics you're genuinely interested in that makes conversation easier, and crucially, explicitly communicating preferences. Like maybe saying in a meeting, "That's a great point, I need a moment to think about it," or "Could I follow up with some thoughts in an email?"
Setting expectations.
Exactly. And creating what some call recovery pockets, brief moments of solitude, like taking a short walk outside, or even just stepping into a quiet room for 5 minutes during a long party or conference. That's vital for managing the social battery. Setting clear boundaries around social energy helps ensure that when they do engage, they can be fully present and authentic.
That recovery pocket idea is so useful. I think many people do that instinctively without maybe realizing why. It really helps to frame it as energy management. But what about the internal side? Overcoming self-doubt or that pressure to be more outgoing, more like the ideal.
That's huge. It's really important for introverts to internalize that social skills are just that. Skills. They can be learned and developed. It's not about trying to be an extrovert or competing with them. It's about finding authentic ways to connect, focusing on their strengths like being a great listener, asking thoughtful follow-up questions, sharing relatable experiences that can make interactions feel more confident. And cultivating self-confidence often involves actively looking at those self-beliefs, maybe challenging them, and using things like positive affirmations regularly to sort of rewrite that internal script.
This leads to a really important question I think many listeners might have. Does being introverted mean you're automatically more likely to be lonely? Or maybe less happy than an extrovert?
That's a really common assumption. But the research paints a more nuanced picture. While some studies do show a correlation between introversion and higher reported loneliness sometimes, the fundamental need for social connection and support, that's universal. It's a human need.
Right. Everyone needs connection.
Everyone does. Introverts are absolutely not immune to the negative effects of social isolation. And interestingly, some studies show they actually get a significant mood boost after socializing, even if they anticipated feeling drained beforehand.
Oh, really? That's counterintuitive.
It is a bit, yeah. And get this. Introverts seem to gain an even greater boost to their happiness from engaging in deeper, more meaningful conversations compared to extroverts.
So quality over quantity again.
It really seems that way. For introverts, having strong social support from friends and family and maybe having a few more close, deep friendships seems to be more strongly correlated with their subjective happiness than just having a wide circle of acquaintances.
That really does challenge that narrative that introverts just want less social connection overall. It sounds like it's about the type and depth of connection.
Exactly. It suggests that while, yes, higher extroversion often correlates with greater subjective well-being and maybe broader social networks on average, for introverts, the quality and depth of their connections might be the more critical factor for their happiness and feeling connected.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. What about parents? Parents of introverted children, especially if the parent themselves is maybe quite extroverted and the child seems very different, how can they best support that child?
Well, that can be a real challenge for parents, definitely. Trying to understand a child who operates so differently. I think the most vital thing is not to shame the child for shyness or quietness. That can make them see it as a fixed, negative part of themselves.
Make it worse.
Exactly. Instead, maybe gently teach self-coaxing skills for social situations. Model friendly interactions yourself. Carefully selecting playdates can help too, maybe with less aggressive children or kids who share similar, quieter interests. Definitely encourage those solitary interests, whether it's painting, reading, building things, writing, because those often lead to finding communities of like-minded peers later on.
Finding their tribe, so to speak.
Find their tribe, exactly. And maybe don't force oral participation in school if it causes real anxiety. Support their strengths in independent work instead. Advocate for quiet spaces if needed. And perhaps most importantly, allow for that decompression time after school. School can be incredibly overstimulating for an introverted child. They need that quiet time to recharge.
That makes so much sense. Wow, what an incredible deep dive this has been into the world of introversion. We've really seen how this personality trait, which is so often misunderstood, is actually rich with unique strengths, deep reflection, creativity, thoughtful leadership, strong analytical skills.
Yeah, and we've also touched on the real challenges introverts face, especially in a world that often leans towards extroversion. But more importantly, I think we've explored practical, really empowering strategies for thriving, whether that's managing social energy, communicating effectively, or just, learning to embrace your authentic self. The core message seems clear. Understanding your own temperament, wherever you fall on the spectrum, allows you to leverage your inherent qualities for better well-being and ultimately more success.
It's such a powerful reminder, isn't it, that our diverse personality types aren't weaknesses we need to fix, but really fundamental parts of a delicate human balance. Each type has valuable contributions to make. So maybe the question for you listening is, how might understanding your own social battery, or perhaps the communication preferences of people around you, change how you approach your next meeting, or even just your next social gathering?
Yeah, maybe consider how you could lean more confidently into your natural strengths, or perhaps cultivate social skills in ways that feel genuine to you, rather than trying to fit into some external mold. This journey of self-understanding, it's ongoing for all of us, isn't it? And it really is a profound path towards greater happiness and effectiveness, no matter where you find yourself on that introversion-extroversion spectrum.